Chapter 1. Free. The morning she was to be questioned, Jin climbed down from the top bunk where she slept with her little sister, Li Mi. "Where are you going, Jin?" whispered Li Mi. "I want to go too." "Shh! You'll wake up Mama. Come if you want, but be quiet." The two girls silently scrambled down past their mother's bunk. Their mother turned restlessly. The girls tiptoed between the rows of bunk beds in the big wooden house. The beds were filled with many sleeping women and children. The girls had lived in this huge room ever since arriving at Angel Island in the United States. It was called a barracks. It was even more crowded than the ship that brought them from China. The girls were bored with life in the barracks. They had to stay inside for most of the day. The Americans didn't want any Chinese people going to the United States without permission. Mrs. Chow said that even if Angel Island wasn't a prison, it sometimes felt like one. Jin, however, had found a secret way out. In the corner of the barracks was a loose board in the floor. When Jin removed it, there was just enough room for a child to squeeze through. Jin and Li Mi crept to the corner of the room. Jin pulled the loose board out of the floor and squeezed through the hole. Then she helped her sister slide down through the opening. "It's still dark, Jin," said Li Mi. "Not for long," whispered Jin. "Now hold on to my jacket and follow me. And be quiet." They began to crawl. It was damp and smelly under the building. Li Mi began to complain, but soon the girls were standing in the dim light of morning. The ghostly sounds of foghorns filled the harbor. Angel Island itself, however, was quiet. It seemed deserted. Soon the boat would bring the island workers from San Francisco. Jin and Li Mi would then have to hurry back. They were not allowed to leave the barracks without permission. But it was worth the risk. Jin loved these opportunities to get away from the crowded barracks. Jin remembered the days in the damp belly of the ship. She remembered the confusing arrival on the island. These mornings of peace were important to her. Chapter 2. Gateway to the Pacific. Jin led Li Mi to the dock. From there, the sisters could look out over San Francisco Bay. "See that big shape out there?" Jin asked. "That's San Francisco. That's where Father is." "Why can't we go see Father in San Francisco?" Li Mi asked. "The Americans want to be sure we really are Father's family," said Jin. "Of course we are," laughed Li Mi. "But these people don't know us, Li Mi. We have to convince them that we are telling the truth." "But why?" Li Mi asked loudly. "I don't know," whispered Jin. "Keep your voice down." Li Mi looked hurt. "I'm sorry, Jin. I just want to see Father." "Be patient, Li Mi. Someday we will cross the border into the United States and Father will be waiting." Jin tried to sound sure of herself, but she was worried. The law allowed her father to bring his family to the United States. Sometimes, however, people pretended. So the Americans asked a lot of questions to be sure that you were really you. This seemed strange to Jin. How do you prove that you are really a family? She hoped that she would be able to pass this test. "I wish we didn't have to wait so long," said Li Mi. "We've been here for weeks." Jin nodded. She had overheard Mrs. Chow talking about boycotts of American goods in China. Jin asked Mrs. Chow what a boycott was. She was told a boycott is when people refuse to buy something from someone. Mrs. Chow thought that boycotts sometimes made people change the laws. Now there were laws that were meant to keep Chinese people out of the United States. If they were changed, Chinese people would have an easier time coming to the United States. "Tell me a story, Jin," cried Li Mi. "Shh! No stories. I have things to think about now." Li Mi always wanted a story. Jin felt as if she had told Li Mi 1,000 stories since leaving China. Jin understood, though. Li Mi was little. She needed some fun in life. For months now, she had been cramped in damp steamships, then stuck in the barracks. Jin's stories were Li Mi's only pleasure. Now that she thought about it, it was the only fun Jin had too. "I'll tell you a story after breakfast," said Jin, "but only if you're quiet now." The girls sat quietly on the dock, watching the seagulls soar. Then Jin heard the boat that brought her friend Big Quan and the other cooks to the island from San Francisco. Soon Big Quan would have breakfast ready. He might even have a letter from her father. "We have to get back before everyone wakes up," Jin said. The sisters hurried back. They crawled under the barracks and up through the hole in the floor. Their mother was sleeping peacefully when they returned to their beds. Chapter 3. The Cook, the Poet, and the Letter. Each day after breakfast, the women and children were allowed out of the barracks for exercise. Jin ran as fast as she could to the island's kitchen. Big Quan was standing at the kitchen's back door. He was wiping his forehead with a towel. It was hard work cooking for hundreds of people. Pots and kettles crashed together. Jin could hear the sounds of Quan's helpers cleaning in the kitchen. Jin thanked Quan for cooking her breakfast. "You're welcome, Jin," the big man's voice boomed like a cannon. Then he looked around and whispered, "I have something for you." Big Quan gave Jin a piece of folded paper. "It's from your father. Give it to your mother right away." Jin tucked the paper into her pocket. "Thank you, Quan," she said as she ran off. Jin ran to find her mother. She couldn't wait to hear her read the letter from her father. She hoped that he would tell them when they would be able to join him in San Francisco. But she stopped as she passed another barracks. The door was open. Inside, a man was carving Chinese characters on the wall with a small knife. Jin came closer. The whole wall was covered with words. She asked the man what he was writing. "It's a poem," he said. "It tells how I feel waiting here, locked up, missing my family. It tells my hopes and dreams for the future." The man didn't look away from his work as he spoke. Jin asked him why he was carving the poem on the wall. "Someday, when I am gone," he said, "another man will be here in my place. I want him to know that I came this way too, so he will not give up hope." Jin's eyes moved over the carvings on the wall. "It's as if you will be here to help him," Jin said. The man looked up at her for the first time and smiled. "That's right," he said. "This poem will also tell others many years from now that we suffered in order to come to this new land." "Why don't you write your poem on paper?" Jin asked. The man laughed. "I have no paper, no pen, but this is better. These words are cut into the walls. As long as these walls stand, they will be here. They will last a long time." Jin traced the words carved into the wall with her finger. "Can you read?" the man asked. Jin nodded. As she read the words of the poem, Jin shivered with excitement. She felt people moving across the face of the world. For a moment, Jin understood that she and her family and this poet were all part of something very big. How strange, she thought. Someday in 100 years, someone else will touch these words too. Jin thanked the poet, then she ran off to deliver her father's letter. Jin's mother read the sisters the letter from their father. "My dear family," he wrote, "an officer from the United States government was here. He asked many questions about our village in China and our lives there. I answered with the truth, and I know you will do the same. If you do, I know we will be together soon. I have heard that there are boycotts of American goods in China to get decent treatment for our people here. Maybe things will get better for us. Have courage and hope." Jin's mother folded the note and put it away. Then she said, "Girls, answer carefully today. People are sent back if they get these questions wrong. Your father is counting on you to be strong." Jin now felt that her family's happiness depended on her. It was almost time to go back to the barracks. Jin saw Mrs. Schwartz coming toward them. Mrs. Schwartz was the most important American Jin knew. She was in charge of the women and children on the island. Chapter 4, The Test. "The immigration officers are ready to see you," Mrs. Schwartz said. Before Jin could stop her, Li Mi asked, "Why is it so hard to get into America?" Mrs. Schwartz wasn't angry. She just laughed. "There are unions of workers in the United States who are afraid that you will take their jobs," she said. "But we just want to be with Father," said Li Mi. "I know," said Mrs. Schwartz, "but in order to prevent strikes and other trouble, the government has made it difficult for the Chinese to enter the country. Come on now. The immigration board is waiting." And with that, she turned and led the little family to meet its biggest test. Jin ran to catch up to Mrs. Schwartz. "Excuse me, ma'am. What will they ask us on the test?" "It's not a test, Jin," said Mrs. Schwartz. "Just some questions to make sure you're not a paper daughter." Jin knew that a paper daughter was someone who pretended to be a citizen's daughter. This way she could get into the United States. "But I'm not," she said. "We're a real family." "Of course you are, dear," said Mrs. Schwartz. "But we need to be sure. Many people want to get into the United States, and some are breaking the law to do it." Jin could tell the woman had other things on her mind. "Will I be with my mother?" Jin asked her. "No," Mrs. Schwartz said. "You'll each see the board alone. That way we'll know if you're telling the truth. Don't worry so much. Everything will be fine." Jin wasn't sure of that at all. 3 men questioned Jin for a long time. The men sat behind a long table. 2 of the men were officers. One of these officers had little glasses perched on the end of his nose. The sun was shining on the glasses so that Jin could not see the man's eyes. He frightened Jin a little. The men asked so many questions that Jin couldn't keep track of them all. They asked Jin to describe her house. Were there any steps up to the front door? How many windows did her house have? "Who is old Ming?" an officer asked. "He's an old farmer," Jin told him, "but now he's too old to work and he has no family, so everyone in the village helps him out." "What happened to his family?" Jin froze. She didn't know the answer. She didn't want to get the answer wrong. She was tempted to make up a story like the one she made up for Li Mi, but then she remembered that her father said she should tell the truth. "I don't know," Jin said. "My whole life, old Ming has always been by himself." The men stared at her. Jin started to tremble. Suddenly, the man wearing glasses said, "Little girl, could you tell me where the well in your village is?" After a moment, Jin said, "There's no well in our village." "No well? No water?" he asked. "Are you sure about that?" He looked like an angry bird. For a moment, Jin was afraid. "Yes, sir," said Jin. "The well is just outside our village, not in our village. We have to carry water a long way. I know because that's my job." "You're sure about that?" the man asked again. Jin thought he was trying to get her to change her mind. The strange thing was, Jin was tempted to do just that. She wanted the man to smile and say, "Good answer, Jin." Luckily, she remembered what her father had said and stuck to the truth. "Yes, sir, I'm sure." The man stared at her for a moment, then he nodded and wrote something down. Later, Jin was sitting on the edge of her mother's bunk. She felt very sad. She had a sick feeling that she had failed the test. Jin didn't know whether she had answered the men in the way that they had wanted. How could she? She didn't know these men or what they liked. Jin went over the test in her mind. She couldn't think of any moment where the immigration officer seemed pleased or friendly. What could she do? "Jin, don't look so unhappy." Jin looked up and saw Mrs. Schwartz standing over her. "I'm afraid we will never get into the United States," Jin said sadly. "Cheer up," Mrs. Schwartz told her. "You don't think I was always an American citizen, do you? No. We came to the United States from Germany. I was just about your age, but I never gave up, and look at me." Jin looked at Mrs. Schwartz. Why was this woman so cheerful, she wondered. "Better start packing, Jin," Mrs. Schwartz said. "You're going to the United States."